right. So, y'all, Victoria and I are going to be talking about Call of Duty and Cold War history today, and I'm excited for this. Uh, when we hopped on our call, I was like, I'm excited. It's totally not the coffee. It's totally not the coffee. It is pure excitement. It is pure excitement. By the way, hi Victoria.
Hi.
Y'all, let me know how audio is. Let me know how audio is because I had to adjust some things because um, we're talking through Discord, and this is the first time that I've used the theory questing scene since I broke everything a couple of weeks ago. So y'all let me know because I already know that we don't have text, we don't have chat over in the chat window. Why my lights flashing? Nuggin!
NKNFTZ just resubscribed for 29 months. Yeah.
That's an echo. That's an echo. Nugget, thank you so much. Oh, but that might be an echo for me. Did y'all hear an echo? Or was that just me? What am I listening to? Boop, boop, boop.
I was going to say, I'm like, I don't hear an echo, but I'm not listening to you through the computer, so
Yes,
my opinion's
okay.
invalid.
Your opinion is never invalid. I don't know why we're getting an echo. I bet I know why we're getting an echo. Hold on. Advanced audio properties, desktop. Nope, we just wanna. It's called monitor and output. Monitor off, close. Hopefully that'll fix it. Victoria, talk for me.
Hi. We're going to talk about things. Is there an echo?
Can y'all hear Victoria still?
Echo!
Saying we're gonna talk about things. Your echo is asleep. Sounds good. Mic check, mic check. All right, good. So that should have fixed it. No echo on your end. Yay, team. All right, y'all. So a little context, and I've told this story before when I was kind of talking about this as we got ready to roll into this. It's weird because Victoria and I think we talk about Call of Duty and we talk about like the Call of Duty story, and we end up talking about the Cold War. We've done it even on the podcast before, talked about like the Cold War and Call of Duty. We talked about the Cold War and Far Cry 6. We talked about like because Victoria's like historical period is like the Cold War. But it's also weird because while that's your period, that's like my life. Cause I'm old, and we'll talk more about that as we get started. But I think that how this idea popped in my head is that recently, y'all know, because if things have been open, like free to attend, I always post them, and I know a lot of y'all have been coming by like either talks on Zoom calls or Twitch streams from like talks that I've been giving at different conferences and like interviews on other people's like shows and things like that. But it came up at a recent talk that I was giving. This one I don't think was open. I don't think there was a free access to this one. We were talking about like the educational nature of AAA games. And so someone had, because it was a bunch of educators, and someone had asked a question about specific like AAA titles you could use for educational purposes, and like the pros and cons of that kind of thing. And someone piped in, and it was more of a comment than a question, but they were like, "Yeah, like Call of Duty," and I was like, "No, hell no." But I thought, then I was like, no, Victoria and I need to have this conversation on a theory questing, because there are so many people, even educators, who are of an age that they didn't live through, well, this is making the assumption that it's over, which I don't think it is. We'll talk about that too. But they didn't live through the Cold War, and they never studied the Cold War as a historical period necessarily. So they think Call of Duty is accurate. And I got things to say about that. It was a trip. It wasn't. You know what? Okay, so yes, you are old enough to have remembered. But I was talking to Victoria about this right before we started. As a child, and I mean, I was not a very young child. I was old enough to understand what was going on. I wasn't quite a tween yet, but I remember sitting up at night with my mother and watching television coverage of the hostage crisis. Like, we watched that real time. It was over a year. I was, like I said, I've been brushing up on my Cold War history, because I've read about the Cold War before, because like I said, because we were living through it. We talked about it a lot in school, and I was an avid reader, so I was reading like what was going on in the world. But it was over a year. It was 400 and something days that these people were like held in captivity. Russia bad, America good. That was my takeaway. And nukes were everywhere. Well, pretty much, right? Mutually assured destruction. But we'll talk about that. And I know Victoria has amazing, smart things to say. And well, you always have amazing, smart things to say, don't you? Me.
Sorry.
Don't you hurt me.
Sometimes.
But I'm excited. So we're gonna and I'll tell you what we're gonna do, and then I'm gonna let Victoria talk. Because I'm, like I said, I'm highly caffeinated right now. I have a coffee. And I forgot. Oh, we're gonna do what we usually do when we are playing like high engagement games. We'll talk while we're playing, but like the meat of it all will take place between games. Hey Stocky, how are you? Will take place between games so that we can focus on what I'm saying. If that didn't happen, it was gonna be killer bees. I mean, well, much like the Cold War, the killer bees are back too. So hey. All right, I'm sorry, Victoria, I wanted to give context, and I talked a lot, but hey.
No, context is great. Hey. Hi. I feel like I should give like some background. Like, wow, why is this random person all about the Cold War? She does game studies. She's talked about controllers on the podcast, and that's her whole frame and personality is controllers. She found that one thing. Made it her whole personality. It's me and controllers. So I started off
just resubscribed for 7
back
months.
in the day. I was at first going to be an English high school teacher, and I'm like, no, I can't do that. So I flipped to double majoring in professional technical writing and in history, which was frowned upon because when you do prof tech and technical communication, they're like, oh, you have to do a science. And I said, no. Not doing a science. I mean, I had like a physics minor, but I'm like, I'm not doing a science. I'm gonna do history. And at the institution I was at, there were kind of select professors that you ended up getting involved with that did specific things. So my partner ended up in world history, and I ended up in Cold War history and modern interpretations of media and visual media and how that all kind of came to be. So I really, really wanted to be a Cold War historian. Desperately. I took like a good 5 classes on the Cold War. I was going to do my master's in Cold War history. Like I wanted to be a Cold War historian until my mentor got fired. Did not get tenure and legit played take this job and shove it in his last class that he taught. And he taught in like gym shorts and a t-shirt after that. And he advised me heavily against going into history, specifically Cold War history, because it's very much a good old boys club. And you can probably tell that from some of the books that I recommended. Like, they are all by dudes for the most part. Mary Dudziak is the only one that's not. But there's an overwhelming good old boys club to Cold War history. And so I was advised against it, but it remained kind of what I wanted to do. So when I was doing my master's degree, and there was a lot of work in game studies, I started focusing on how the Cold War is interpreted and remediated into modern video games. Even going so far as to do a study on Call of Duty and the Bay of Pigs. So here we are, and I don't know how we always seem to get on the topic of the Cold War, and I think it's because of my background in Call of Duty, like, so heavily. I'm like, yeah, I did semi-pro tournaments in Call of Duty, and I did a study in Call of Duty. Like, I was just so big in Call of Duty, and that ends up, I don't know how we keep managing to, like, circle back around to it. And you're like, hey, you want to come and talk about the Cold War? And I was like, yeah, talk about the Cold War with me. Yeah, I will talk about the Cold War. So that's the background. Before I was, like, really big into controllers, I was really big into the Cold War, and I still am. I love Cold War media and how it's remediated into so many different forms. You have often the pro Cold War media throughout, especially the 1940s and 1950s, and getting into the 1960s. And then as Vietnam becomes heavier and heavier, you start seeing a bit of a shift into critiquing the Cold War through media and critiquing the American establishment through television and through film. And that makes it very interesting. And then you see, like, such a hard shift as soon as you have Reagan entering into the picture. So in the very late 70s, and then with his presidency in the 80s, you have a hard turn into what is termed as a Cold Warrior. And Reagan was very much a Cold Warrior, and he marketed himself that way as well to get elected. So he starred in a bunch of Cold War style films that sort of exemplified the American exceptionalism and the American way of life. And for him to become president and kind of exemplify that Cold Warrior attitude, I'm like, oh, it's all perfect. This all makes sense. So yeah, I'm always excited to talk about Cold War media.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting, right? Especially when we talk about the ways that, like, the different kind of cultural shifts during the Cold War, right? The different cultural shifts during the Cold War. So yeah, I'm really interested in, like, the 70s and the 80s because that's what I remember, like, actually remember the most or first about the Cold War, right? Because I remember, like I said, being a child and sitting and watching coverage of what was going on. I remember the boycott of the Olympics. I remember Jimmy Carter, like, just getting the short shrift, and Ronald Reagan and his little monkey Bozo coming on. What was it, Bobo? It was the monkey Bobo in the movie. I was trying to remember the movie he did with the monkey. Was the monkey's name Bobo?
I do not remember.
I think it was Bobo.
It's probably Bobo.
but and I remember, like, all of that very vividly. But then, like, also in my own research, when I went back and looked at Blackness and cultural shifts during and after the Vietnam conflict, because I had an uncle who served in the military during the Vietnam conflict, and came back utterly broken, right? And came back, good night, Maddie, came back utterly broken, right? Like many folks, right? But what was most interesting about the ways that people of color, specifically Black folks who served in the military, and the ways that they were targeted, in terms of propaganda, in terms of rhetoric, right? The ways that they were targeted, and the ways that the quote unquote enemy, right, would play these broadcasts that were aimed directly at Black men serving in the military. Like, why are you fighting us? Our struggle is the same. Look at the way your country treats you. This is what we're fighting against, right? Really caused a kind of I don't want to use ableist terms, but I mean a kind of, shall we say, cultural, mental, psychological, ethical kind of crack or break, right? Because they were 110% right? So, and this is something that we had seen, and this is something that we had seen with black men serving in the military, black folks serving in the military for a very long time, right? Where we would have black folks serving in the military and dying in wars and coming back to a situation where they were being treated as less than, right? And so we had finally found an opponent that decided to kind of center, kind of narrow in on that and use that to their advantage. And that was a difficult thing, right? If you, I've read like tons of accounts, and if people are interested, I actually, like I said, this was actually a whole research thing for me for a long time. I have a whole shelf of books, right? That gives accounts of black men who were serving in the military during the Vietnam conflict and the ways that they felt about this and how it affected them in that moment and later, right? So, the Cold War, interestingly enough, is something that just keeps coming back for me over and over and over again as well in different ways. So I am a nerd, and I'm super excited to talk about this. And I'm super excited.
To get to your point of it becoming an information war tactic used to, like, specifically targeted towards black men and black women even. There's a phrase in Russian for it. Like, it is a specific war tactic in the propaganda game through the Cold War. There's a Russian phrase for it. Would you like to hear the Russian phrase?
Yes, please.
Okay. It's a u vas negrov lynchuyat. And it literally means, and you lynch black people. So anytime the United States did something, Russia would come right back and point out, like when the United States would point out the human rights crises in Russia, and even to a lesser extent in the communist China with the 5-year plan. And the United States would point out the human rights crises. And Russia would come right back with, and yet you in your country are lynching black people. What are you going to say to that? And so it became such a flashpoint in the United States. Like, we need to take care of civil rights. And you get it with when you start looking into Lyndon B. Johnson's presidency. There's a hard sort of flashpoint between the civil rights movement in America and the propaganda being used in Russia and in Vietnam, because Vietnam's just a proxy war, and targeted towards black service members. Because Russia's not the enemy in this regard. So Russia had a very specific information war tactic to use in the civil rights movement.
So,
and they were planned.
Okay, I'm shutting up. Okay, so interesting. I'm gonna put. I'm making Victoria and I have had this conversation. There are going to be. We will warn people. There are going to be spoilers at certain points, and before we get into like heavy spoilers, I'll put up a little, not a little. It's gonna be big. It's gonna be a big graphic across the screen that's gonna say spoilers. And then when we're done with the spoilers, I'll take it down. So if people don't want spoilers, they'll be able to mute while that is on the screen, and then unmute when it goes away. And I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, to talk about that, because we're going to talk about things coming full circle too, in a lot of narrative ways and in historical ways as well. But the and yet you lynch black people has come back to us again in this next phase. I'm going to go ahead and say it. The Cold War ain't over. In this next phase of the Cold War, right? Because now we've got the and you lynch black people coming back when people are when the U.S. is jumping in and trying to talk about people's inequality toward and brutal horrific treatment against women, and yet you've robbed women of every reproductive right they've had for the last 60 years, right? I mean, so we're coming back to that again, which I think is very interesting. And we're going to
especially in like condemning Iran right
yes,
now.
yes,
Yes. Yeah. It's like, and yet.
and yet you've robbed women of reproductive rights. Absolutely, 110%. Hold on just a second. Okay, P was just telling me she was going to take a walk, and I just had to remind her to take her phone. So that, you know, I know where she is. All right. So we're going to keep talking, but we're also going to play some Call of Duty. All right, Victoria. I mean, I know, are we playing just quick play multiplayer? Have you played third person? I mean, we don't have to play third person. I can play either one. But what do you want to play? This is guest gets to choose game and choose what we play.
I prefer domination in the quick
I know
play.
you do. I know you do. Okay, domination is your jam. How about some domination and kill confirmed?
Kill confirmed. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I got you. So it was kind of interesting because Victoria and I were playing the campaign at the same time. Well, you finished the campaign before I did because I am old and my memory is bad. And so I wanted to go back and play the original. I wanted to go back and play the first Modern Warfare 2 before I to refresh my memory before I played the new campaign.
Well, I did that too.
Yeah, but you did it. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
But remember, I just didn't do things I was supposed to be doing so that I could play both of them. And I was like, you know who can't get mad at me? The chair of my dissertation. Why? Because she has a hand in this. Saffista.
Yeah, just use it as an excuse. Well, I didn't have to do it because my chair said I should play video games.
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
My chair said that I was being a little bit too anxious and I should go and play a video game. So I played Stardew Valley for 24 hours straight. And she said, what? That's not what I meant.
Yeah. I learned my lesson. I'm not going to tell you to do that again. So I went back and replayed the first Modern Warfare 2. So that I could, because I remember playing the first I remember playing that game when it first came out, because it came out in 2009. And that was probably my first shooter back, so to speak, because that was the year after P was born. And the first year that, you know, P was around, first year P was the first year of P's life, let's put it that way. My gaming consisted of Bejeweled and more Bejeweled and some occasional World of Warcraft. That was when I figured out that I had to quit World of Warcraft. Peppermint cocoa. So I wanted to replay it because I also, and I've said this before, I used to not play Call of Duty multiplayer at all. I would go to the Redbox, or I would buy it before Redbox days, and I would play the campaign, and that would be it. That would be it. I never played the multiplayer really because it was just far too toxic and it wasn't worth it. So that was so I replayed it, and I remembered most of it, but there were like little nuances of things, little nuanced things in the original game that I was like, I don't remember that, or I didn't remember that. So it was a good idea to do, because this new game, Modern Warfare 2, Roman numeral 2, takes place 3 years after Modern Warfare 2. Those were your thoughts each time a new COD is released. Too toxic, not worth it. If I didn't have That's with a lot of shooters, though. Honestly, that's my. If I didn't have a kind of a couple of groups of people, um, a couple of groups of people that I played shooters with, I would probably never play shooters, to be perfectly honest. But anywho's, so Victoria, I know that you have things that you wanted to talk about in particular, and I'm gonna stop talking because, well, not totally, but I'm gonna stop dominating the conversation so that you can talk too.
So I think like one of the big things in modern warfare in particular is that Russia is going to be the bad guy, Russia bad, which just feeds into this Cold Warrior sort of mindset of America good, Russia bad.
Mm-hmm.
And even and we should probably put the spoiler thing on.
Okay, spoiler. Hold on, let me put the spoiler thing on. So, wait, where's my? Okay, gotta find the right one. Spoilers. All right. Okay, go ahead.
Oh my goodness, that is a great. Just like false leaves and spoilers. Spoilers. So, it's not so much a spoiler for the original Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in 2009. You had no Russian, super controversial. You go in, Makarov shoots up the entire airport. You don't speak Russian because, we have this. Luckily for us, we have the CIA operative who's hanging out here, and we can just blame it on the Americans. We have American guns, we have American stuff. We speak no Russian, we're just going to speak English. No Russian. Blame it on the Americans. The Americans shot up this Russian airport.
Mm-hmm.
And in the most recent Call of Duty, Russia doesn't really have a presence. Like the Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2.
Mm-hmm.
Russia doesn't have such a presence. The enemy is Iran. Until you get to the very end of the game. And you're watching like the very end of the game, you are slid a picture of like who the big bad really is.
So
and it's
okay,
Makarov.
But that really messed me up, right? Because I was like, who is the big bad, right? I mean, because in that moment, it was like going through my head. I was like, if they really want to like give us a gut punch, who is the big bad going to be in this moment, right? Who is the big bad going to be in this moment? And Makarov was the one I expected least, because it wasn't such a surprise. Because I felt like, yeah, while Russia didn't have that same presence in the second game, there is always the implication of Russia.
Oh yeah,
You know
the
what I
implication
mean?
of Russia is just like all over the place. Like, oh yeah, Russia, like Iran got the weapons. Who did they get it from? And there's like a passing comment of Hassan, who is the main antagonist of the game that you're chasing all over the place.
Mm-hmm.
He makes a comment that the U.S. sent missiles to Iran, and it was a declaration of war. And then Graves gets all pissy and is like, "Oh, I'm just gonna punch you. You're done. I'm gonna kill you." And that's it gets buried, because
Mm-hmm.
that is what happens between Russia and the United States, is that in the proxy wars, both sides are going to arm the other, like the militants,
Mm-hmm.
and use their bodies as proxies, and it's always brown bodies.
Yes, Lord. Can we say that again? That is the thing, right? And that is the thing about the proxy wars, both like IRL, right, and in these
Yes.
games. It is always black and brown bodies that are being used as cannon fodder. It is
Black,
all
brown, or people of color, just people of color in general, because Vietnam
Mm-hmm.
doesn't necessarily identify as brown. They identify more in the Asian aspect, but they are still people of color.
Yeah.
And they're going to be used as fodder.
Yeah.
So that Russia and the United States can have a measuring contest. Whose ICBM is bigger?
I was gonna say you can say it. I mean, because I probably would have said it. But yes,
Whose
absolutely.
ICBM is bigger? I mean, even the shape of the ICBM. Let's be real. It's just all phallic. Um, and it is. It's like that. And so when Makarov becomes the big bad, it's like, yes, yes. The Middle East, Iran, this whole thing with Iran stealing these missiles, which are American-made missiles, this whole thing with Iran is just the latest proxy war for the United States and Russia, which is exactly an exact mirror of how it always tends to be in Cold War history and even now. Like we, as a country, go to war with Russia in the form of proxy wars. Russia arms the other side, we arm one side. I mean, that's the whole thing with Afghanistan.
Human drones. Yeah.
We armed the Mujahideen in the 80s. And we're all so shocked when they turned to those weapons. Like, oh, yeah, by the way, you guys are also a anti... just you guys are also going to get it. Like, you're no better than Russia.
It's the thing, right? We installed and armed so many dictators across this planet, and then everybody wanted to clutch the pearls when they turned around and acted like dictators toward us.
It's the Pikachu face.
It is the Pikachu face.
100%.
Yeah.
100%. Like, Saddam Hussein, totally, we'd be friends with that dude in the 80s.
We did that. Yeah, we did that. Yeah.
We will 100% arm your people. Oh, snap. We should probably not have done that. But we did it to fight Russia.
Yeah.
And Russia's just like, yeah, same. Samesies. We're also arming everyone to fight you.
Yeah. You know.
And that's just such a big thing in this game. And even going so far as Mexico is, and the border towns are the place of much of the conflict. And I wish it had gotten deeper into the United States going and commandeering and taking over and stealing the base of Alejandro. Like, just completely stealing it. And then like, okay, if you don't agree, we're going to shoot you. And by the way, your people, we detained them. And it doesn't get into that. It just becomes a scene for a place. And I love the mission. I love the mission alone, where you go through as Soap trying to get out of this base that has been commandeered in this border town.
Yeah.
But I wish it had gone deeper.
Right.
Into that Graves is murdering people. And Soap and Ghost, express their disgust and distaste. But it never goes deep into... This guy is murdering brown bodies, searching for these two white dudes.
Yeah.
From the English
Collateral
Isles.
damage.
Yeah.
I mean, and the whole thing about the way that Phil Graves, right? Phil Graves, yeah, there's no pun there. Phil Graves kind of exists outside of the official, right? Because he's he exists outside of the official. The whole way that he exists kind of just plays into that whole Cold War mentality of plausible deniability. Right? You can't prove we did that.
Yes.
We didn't tell them to do that.
In 50 years, we will admit to it, but for now, we did not do that.
Yeah, we didn't do that.
Like the coup in Chile, when the first democratically elected communist is elected president, the United States is like, can't have that.
No.
Can't have that.
Can't have that.
Can't have that. Not in our hemisphere.
Yeah. I mean, and so it's interesting. And okay, so I'm gonna talk about this. Some of y'all might get mad at me. I'm sorry. You know what? Prepare to be mad. But like when we look at what y'all know how I am anyway, and I purposely wore my Organize, Abolish, Restore t-shirt today. I was looking for a more militant one, but I didn't have time. But anyway, so because I have some shirts even I won't wear on stream. But like when we look back over the notion of plausible deniability, the notion of proxy wars, the notion of all of these things that we did covertly as a country during the 60s and 70s, especially, right? When we start thinking about like the 859,000 times we tried to kill Fidel Castro, right? All the ways that we did. Like, folks like to talk about Russia and like Russian oligarchs and talking about the fact that they, you know, they poison people, they irradiate people. These people go through all this horrible shit. What you think we did to what do you think we did to Fidel Castro? I'm just asking. I mean, because it's the same things that we talk about as being war crimes and all these atrocities are the same things that we did as a country to other people before, right? Like, and there were all of these assassinations because they were trying to assassinate these folks that were the leaders of these countries that we no longer agreed with, even though we may have been in bed with at some point. And we tried to assassinate them, but then when it turns around and, you know, I mean, and because everybody likes to martyr JFK, right? But he was, I mean, he was knee deep in that shit too, right? So when JFK got assassinated, all of a sudden he was an angel who butter wouldn't melt in his mouth, right? But this, of course, is like right in the middle of all of this shit, right? So, but people wanted to talk about how horrible this was, but he was participating in the same kinds of actions, right? See, and then people got mad at folks. People got mad at folks like Malcolm X when he said the chickens have come home to roost, right? Because he was the one that admitted, right, or called out the fact, right, that indeed we were just kind of reaping our own rewards, so to speak, and I use rewards as scare quotes. But I think it's interesting. You don't know about Matt. You're right, and we're just as guilty in the UK of doing the same things. Yes, y'all are. I mean, and that's important to remember, right? Because we had allies all over the world, like yes, the UK, right, who were participating in the same kind of thing. Y'all were plotting and scheming with the rest of them. I don't know. Thoughts, ideas? I'm sorry. I said I was gonna stop talking so much.
I think a lot about, well, you brought up Fidel Castro and what has been done to Cuba, even so far. And like yesterday, the UN voted to, the word just like went right out of my head. But for the 30th time, the UN is like, you should stop embargoing Cuba. It is bad. And the US is like, eh. For the 30th time.
And I remember as a child that it got like the ways that it was pushed to the American people. And see, this is another thing, right? Because the Vietnam conflict was the first kind of war that that civilians actually had like eyes on. You know what I mean? Because of the fact that so much was televised and there was so much kind of propaganda around it. But even when we talk about Cuba and embargoes and Fidel Castro, the ways it was pushed to us as civilians was all about Cuban cigars. It was not about all of the horrific shit that was going on and all the horrific shit we were doing as a country, but it was all about Cuban cigars. People were upset because they couldn't get Cuban cigars. People weren't upset about the fact that we were trying over and over again to murder a man because we did not agree with what he was doing in his country, like it's any of our damn business. But it was about Cuban cigars. I mean, I remember that was the whole thing that people were talking about on television. It was on sitcoms. It was on talk shows. People were talking about Cuban cigars all the time. Nobody was talking about anything mildly political. It was about personal inconvenience. That is the wildest thing. I was thinking about that just the other night because, like I said, I've been brushing up on my Cold War history, and I was reading a chapter. About Cuba and Fidel Castro, and I was like, it was about Cuban cigars. Absolutely, 110%, 110%.
Yeah. Well, what like the flipping switch for Che Guevara is the United Fruit Company. The CIA, at the behest of the United Fruit Company, overthrows in Guatemala Arbenz's government, and and Guevara was very involved in the social reforms that were happening underneath Jacobo Arbenz, I believe it was, in Guatemala. And the United Fruit Company is like, can't have that capitalism. We need the plantations of Guatemala. Like, we need all of this stuff. We have to do something. The CIA is like, absolutely we do. And so going back to, like, now the chickens have come home to roost. We made Che Guevara because of all of the CIA assisted coups and overthrows and assassinations that were going on in Latin America.
Mm-hmm.
So we make our own revolutionaries, and then we hunt them down.
Yeah, when they don't serve our purposes anymore.
Yeah, and murder them.
Yeah, absolutely. When they don't serve our purposes anymore. I mean, because it is never about equality or quality of life for people of color. It never is. It is all about the almighty dollar. It's all about the almighty dollar. And once they are no longer tools to serve white privilege, white capitalism, and white quality of life, they have no purpose. And if they buck back against the system in any way, shape, or form, that's when they die. That's when they gotta go. That's when they gotta go. And especially, and God forbid, they say, I'm gonna tell somebody.
Oh yeah.
God forbid they say, I'm gonna tell somebody.
Yeah, we don't talk about that.
No.
Do not be a whistleblower.
No. I mean, and this is, again, like I said, this is only the stuff we know. I mean, it would, I would love to know. But I would probably have to disappear after somebody told me. It wouldn't be worth it. It wouldn't be worth it.
And then you get games like this that focus in on atrocities that occurred during the Cold War, and don't really get into America did that.
Okay, I got an idea. Let's play another round. Then I want to talk about, because you touching upon it. You might not be. Wherever you want to go, we can go. But where I would also like to talk about is, I want to talk about the FBI and the CIA.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm gonna keep an eye out my front. I'm gonna keep an eye out my front window up here to see if a black van pull up in front of my house. All right.
Oh my goodness. Okay, so you wanted to talk about the FBI and the CIA and undercover ops.
Because I mean, and I wanted to, because I mentioned it like low key earlier when we started talking about plausible deniability, because that's the whole purpose of CIA. But yeah, I want to talk about that. I'm gonna let you start though, and I'm gonna shut up because and then I'm gonna talk.
So the first thing that always comes to mind when I think about the CIA is and the Cold War is Allende, which, as I mentioned, is the first democratically elected communist in the Western Hemisphere. So he's elected in Chile. And I don't know why they thought it was going to be a great idea, because in the same instance that this is all happening, Kissinger, who's a huge policymaker at the time, and by the way, still alive, in case you didn't know, Kissinger is still living.
He
like
was just in the
years.
news, and people were like, why do we think Henry Kissinger was there? Because y'all want to think that all this shit happened a long time ago, and it didn't. But go ahead, I'm sorry.
And also, he should be dead. He is 99 years old. The
Evil
world
don't
does not
die.
need.
Evil don't die. Go ahead, I'm sorry.
But his big quote about Chile was, "It's a dagger pointed at the heart of Antarctica." Like, that completely dismisses Chile. He's like, it does not matter. Nobody cares about Chile. But the United States was like, Kissinger, but we do. But we do. We can't have that. Not in the Western Hemisphere. Can't have that. So a coup to overthrow Allende and then install a dictator. What else would we do? We install dictators. We do it in Argentina. We do it in Venezuela. We do it all throughout Latin America, because Latin America is like, well, hey, equality might actually be pretty nice, and like these social reforms to kind of give power back to the people versus the plantations owned by capitalist white people, most of them in the United States. I think we should have better treatment. I think we should have better treatment. And the United States is like, no, can't have that. United Fruit Company is like, our workers are not doing the work. We need them to pick the fruit. And the United States is like, CIA, go do your thing. Huge deal during the Cold War is to overthrow democratically elected individuals who might have some sort of communist leaning, any sort of communist leaning, or favors towards social reform, overthrow them, install a dictator. And then when that dictator is like, we don't like the United States, clutch your pearls. My God, they're against us too. Why don't they like us? Yeah. It's the big deal about the CIA is to fight for democracy or whatever that means. The United States' brand of democracy and what that means in other parts of the world, specifically in what are termed second world and third world nations.
Yeah.
The second world being who is backing the Soviet Union, and then the third world being everybody else.
Everybody else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So you have first world, everybody that backs the United States. Second world, everybody that backs the Soviet Union. And then third world, which become the battleground states, battleground countries, which oddly enough happen to mostly be black and brown. Imagine that. Spoiler alert.
That's not a game spoiler, so we didn't have to put spoiler up for that one. Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, right? Because game spoiler. Hold on, I gotta put the game spoiler up because this is game spoiler. Where's the thing? There it is. Okay, spoilers. So mute if you don't want the spoilers, and then I'll turn it off when we're done. But I mean, if you mute, you're gonna miss the conversation because we're not going into great detail about the whole game itself. But I mean, it's just contextual. That's why when in this latest in Call of Duty Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2, when we see, like, that's why the picture that I chose for our tweet is like Laswell standing in like the war room, so to speak, right? But Laswell is is like for real CIA, right? And that was the whole rationale that was the whole reasoning behind starting the CIA, right? The Central Intelligence Agency, right? They're spies, right? They're spies, and they wanted to have, they say, plausible deniability. They want to be able to say, don't let your lying eyes fool you, that wasn't us. Right, so you have a bunch of people that will roll up. I'm still looking at my front window. Roll up in front of your house in a black van and make you disappear, and then so that the United States can say, "I don't know what happened to her. She was at home. She was streaming. Her doorbell rang. She disappeared. It ain't had nothing to do with us. We was watching Big Brother. I don't know. We was watching the baseball game. We was watching something. But we have proof because look." Here's these, here's, I don't know, I was talking to my mom on the telephone. Here's records, right? So that you have this, which is interesting, right? Because this was the same thing that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Victoria, because, I'm not always right. But also done in response to kind of it's kind of done in response to folks like Russia, who were already doing that kind of thing and still doing that kind of thing. And of course, we always say bad things about Russia for doing, not that we shouldn't say bad things about Russia. Don't get it twisted. We say bad things about Russia for doing the stuff that they do in terms of making people disappear, in terms of things like the KGB, in terms of like all of these things. And the only thing that they've done is been more transparent, more visible with theirs than we have. We got the same thing going on. but it was done kind of in response to that because we needed spies that could spy on them in the ways that they spy on us, right? Like when we started talking about atomic bombs and H bombs, and all of these bombs, right? When the United States decided to start threatening the rest of the world with the fact that, hey, if this again, mutually assured destruction, right? So if we go to war, you know what, we're not even going to war no more. We just gonna we got this bomb. Let me tell you about this bomb we got. And then all of a sudden folks are like, we didn't know for 5 years you had that bomb. What you talking about? Right? So
it's a really famous moment.
It is.
So Churchill gets voted out. He's no longer prime minister. And this is at the end of World War II.
Mm-hmm.
And FDR dies, and so Truman becomes president. And so you have the three heads of the very big powers fighting World War II now. So you have Truman, who's facing Stalin. Stalin's been there the whole time.
Just chilling.
And Truman goes against the wishes of the people that be. Truman goes up at Yalta to Stalin and says, we have an atomic bomb. And Stalin basically says, yeah, I know. We are aware of all of this. And the CIA grew out of the OSS, which was a World War II organization. I think it was like the, what was the OSS? The Office of Strategic Service? Maybe, I don't know. Somebody can check me on that. The OSS is meant to end at the end of World War II because it's no longer needed. It's a wartime agency.
Yep.
And the CIA and people in the OSS were like, we don't want it to end. We don't want it to end. We don't want that to end. And Truman starts realizing that, hey, the KGB is really, really good. Russia is really good at information gathering, and we should probably also be that good.
Yep.
We were never that good, but that's what the CIA grew out of, was a need to try and beat Russia on the information gathering tactics. Mm-hmm. And since Russia was doing so good at gathering information on the United States and its allies, the CIA was created as a response. It's a Cold War organization to gather information on Russia and its allies. And unfortunately, we were never as good as Russia. We're still not as good as Russia at information and disinformation and misinformation campaigns. Russia is very good at it. It is what they are kind of prided upon, is that their information campaigns are incredibly effective, as we've seen in recent years. Like, Russia is very good at spreading disinformation and misinformation and tailoring social media to what they need. Russia, very good at it, and we're still not as good at that. And it's not to say that like, ooh, Russia good, America bad. It's that we're not as good at Russia at disinformation and misinformation. And Russia's still pretty bad.
Yeah.
This is not saying Russia good. This is like, Russia's really good at information.
Right. Good as in successful, not good as in ethically good. Right. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? Because you have that really, like you said, it's a famous moment when Stalin's like, yeah, I already know. I already know what you got. I mean, and we know. Exactly. But that too is, and what grows out of that moment, in my mind, is the whole kind of fear of sleeper cells. Right? It's like, see, they already knew. They because they clearly got moles planted deep in places that, that we didn't even recognize, right? So then there was like the thought that these same kinds of moles existed everywhere. And it was a fear tactic that was used to like scare the shit out of people and to justify a lot of stuff that they were doing and kind of start giving them carte blanche for continuing to do the stuff they were already doing, but not piss people off at the same time. My controller went to sleep. How dare you?
It's one of those reasons why say something campaigns make me so nervous.
Yeah.
Because I get when they are coming from, especially nonprofits that deal with trafficking. I understand. I get it. See something, say something. But the rhetoric of see something, say something goes so deep into the Red Scare and legitimately ruining people's lives over suspected communist ties.
I mean, but it worked for Ronald Reagan. I'm just saying.
Mm. Oh my goodness. I like there's a lot of reasons to be mad and angry about Ronald Reagan. There are so many. You probably just spend this entire stream talking about all of the shit that Ronald Reagan did and implemented. But
I mean, even before he was in office, when he was, you know,
when he was
an
governor.
actor.
And an actor, but you know, and governor. He was not a good person. And so Problems in American Foreign Relations was one of the, like, post 1890 was one of the classes I took. It focused heavily on the Cold War. And we get to Reagan and we're talking about, you know, the disarmament and the SALT acts. And they're trying to talk about disarming these nuclear weapons. And it's Gorbachev and Reagan. And these are transcripts of the meetings and, like, word for word. Great book. But one that will just make you so mad because you're reading these transcripts. And Gorbachev is trying so hard to get to the point, like, okay, so if I disarm this many missiles, how many will the United States disarm? How many missiles should we disarm? Or what types of missiles should we disarm? Should we disarm the, you know, intercontinental? Should we disarm this short range? Like, can we get to the point of what we should disarm? We're here about disarmament. And Reagan goes on a monologue. And he goes, Michael, because he says Michael, not Mikhail. It's in the transcript. It's just, one day we'll meet at Reykjavik, and you will come, and it will be the disarming of the last nuclear weapon. And you will be there, and you will look very young. And I will come, but I will look very, very old. And you will say, Ronnie, is that you? And Gorbachev is interjecting, like, how many missiles do you want to disarm? I'm like, this is the most insane transcript. And this is high level. These are two people in charge of so much in the world at this point. So much in the world. And Reagan is going on a monologue about disarming the last nuclear weapon in Iceland decades forward. And I was like, I can't with this man. This is what is going on right now. And, like, how many bombs are we going to disarm? It just drove me insane reading these transcripts. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
One day I will have to find it, and I will send it to you to post in one of the Discord chats. So I'll just post it in the general chat, because I still have that book, and I have to find it and be like, this man was leader of one of the largest nuclear powers, if not the largest nuclear power.
Yep.
I think hence, like, back then it was debated whether or not Russia or the United States was in the lead, but it was always the United States. Russia was just trying to keep up. But the leader of the largest nuclear power is going on a goddamn monologue about disarming the last bomb in Iceland, and it is the most insane thing to read.
Yeah. It's, it is. It is what it is. I mean, it's interesting. It's interesting because, you know, when we start to think about why things have come, how things came to be the way that they are and where they came from, is pretty interesting. And then I want to, we're gonna play another round. We're gonna play another round, and then it sounds like a dark comedy sketch in a bad way.
It does, but it's not, and it's like reading a fever dream, to be honest. You're like, no, I could, like, clearly this is something I dreamed up. Like, I must have been sick. I must have had the flu.
Was this like the beginning of dementia for him? Like, seriously, for real?
It might have been, but it was bad. Like, it was. It's one of those things that you read and you're like, I don't know. what is happening right now.
And
But it's not good.
Yeah, it's not. And then I want to talk about because it's not in Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 in the same way, but I want to talk about I want to talk about the highway.
Okay.
When we come back, but I want to play another game. I want to play another match. And see where we get.
So worked up about Ronald Reagan right now.
Look.
As one does, as one gets.
Ronald Reagan. Ronald Wilson Reagan.
Is that what the W stands for?
I am 99.9% sure it is W. It's Wilson. Let's see what we get. And we'll talk about why this all. I mean, we won't talk about why this all started, but we're gonna talk about specific things because, like I said, it really like hit home when folks were starting to talk about the historical aspects of historical aspects of Call of Duty, and okay, here we go, connecting. Oh, we got a domination.
While it's loading, I can briefly say that the FBI was really good at funding Hollywood and making movies about that were anti-communist, like The Red Menace, very famous movie about communism bad. But the FBI was really good at funding Hollywood and being like, hey, make this movie, and Hollywood being like, we like money.
We like money.
We like money. We will make that movie.
And nobody wanted to get caught up in the McCarthyism. Nobody wanted to get caught up in the McCarthy scare, because that destroyed your whole life. Somebody could be mad at you and be like, I don't like you, and then go to McCarthy and his crew and be like, they a communist. They communist.
Name names. This person did not accept our money.
Mm-hmm.
Clearly a communist.
Clearly a communist. Oof. And we would get the border map. Because we can also talk about how they snuck the cartel into campaign.
What was Valeria's quote? What did she say? So long as there's a war on terror, there is no war on drugs.
Exactly. So long as there's a war on terror, there is no war on drugs, and we gotta talk about that. I mean, because it's true.
We are taking Charlie.
But then I could also get myself in trouble and talk about who really funds the war on drugs, who really funds the drug trade in this hemisphere, shall we say? Oh, this domination. Ain't no tags. Okay.
But thank you for trying to pick up the tags that I would have left.
Enemy is securing Bravo.
Where's B? There it is.
And it's a scary spot.
It is right in the middle. That's a horrible spot.
Alpha.
I don't like this map.
I don't like it because it's grenade heavy.
We are taking Bravo.
There's so many explosions in this one. People are like, yeah, there's so many cars.
I can't see.
Let's just light them all on fire.
Bravo secure. We are losing Bravo. We have the lead.
Get off Bravo.
Enemy is taking Bravo.
Where they is? Oh, missed you. Come on through there. Wow. That's where he was. Government, we all know that. According to the boys, it's the CIA. Again, it's not the CIA. It's the government. It's the U.S. government, and they just use the CIA as a vehicle because, again, it's the same reason that the CIA was created in the first place: plausible deniability.
And that's like the big thing that Graves is in this game is 100% the plausible deniability aspect of it. Like Phil Graves.
Hostile UAV in the area.
Like, what should we call a person who's a mercenary, but also 100% government funded by Shepard.
Phil Graves.
Bugs me.
And yes, I mean, so Vali, you are right in that it's the CIA, but I am always hesitant to say it is the CIA because that makes it seem like the CIA is this separate entity that can be blamed for something when it's not. Right? It's not a separate entity. It is a working part of the U.S. government.
We are losing Bravo.
Let's just say the random Joes didn't discover LSD. No, LSD was, you know, was used as a way to, you know, was okay. If I'm recalling correctly, LSD, again, another, you know, Cold War kind of thing, was originally being thought of as a way to get information out of folks.
Yeah, it was like an idea for a truth
Truth
serum.
serum. Yeah.
Russia spread like this great propaganda that truth serum existed, and the United States is like, what?
They like, we gonna make some of that too.
If I remember correctly, that's the reason LSD was started. But there was a great disinformation campaign of like, we have truth serum, and the United States is like, we have to find a way to combat that and also make that.
Mm-hmm. Always in response to something. Thank you for the follow. Welcome on in. Oh, I meant to do that.
We are losing Bravo.
So a big thing is that,
Friendly SAE on the way.
and this is speculation, and from being sort of embedded in so much of that research and such, is that a big reason that Russia is so good at disinformation is that they have to be, because Russia doesn't have a ton of money to spend to outspend the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a big reason the Cold War so-called ended, was Perestroika and Glasnost ended the Cold War because it's transparency and openness.
You're halfway to mission.
And Gorbachev is like,
Fighting.
we don't have the money to support the Soviet satellites anymore. You're gonna have to start supporting yourself. Also, here's like, let's just open up transparency.
We are
Let's
taking
be more
Alpha.
transparent. And so to be really good and be able to compete,
We control all
the Soviet
objectives.
Union would need
Maintain
to be
the perimeter.
very good at disinformation. Because otherwise, how are you going to combat somebody that has a ton of money?
We are losing
You spread
Alpha.
disinformation and make them spend money on things like, hey, truth serum.
We took Alpha.
It was, but it didn't work how they wanted, so they released on the streets. Well, they released a lot of drugs, well, different drugs on the streets for different purposes. I forgot I turned my my ADS thing with just a trigger pull off because it was pissing me off the other night. Yeah. So, because we were gonna talk about
Highway of Death.
yes, we talk about the highway death, but just in general, like all of those fun, nuanced propaganda placements. Okay, so I'm gonna let you tell us about the highway of death in the game first.
In the game, okay, so in Modern Warfare, the 2019 version,
Mm-hmm.
there comes a point where players take on this, isn't it like a sniper? Like you're supposed to be using sniper rifles, overlooking a road. You're overlooking a road, and what happens in the game is that it's called the Highway of Death because the Russian forces had bombed it during the invasion, killing all those trying to escape the area.
So can we step back for a second first to the part in the game before that, right? Because when they first like start planning it, it's remember it's the one where you're in the house with the revolutionary who has the kids, and you're planning it out, and he takes out the map, and he was like, here's the road you have to take, and he kind of tells the story about what the Russians did.
It's been a long time since I played that section, so you should talk about that.
You're like, no, you talk about that. So, so you are in a house that is the house of kind of an ally, right? But he has two small children, And he gets murdered, and then the children hide, and there's like a whole thing, right, where you have to like play through this scenario in the house. And before he dies, he's telling you the path that you need to take, and he's like, this is the road. He rolls out this map. He's like, this is the road, and this is where, and he explains what's gone on in the past, like historically, and it is all attributed to the Russians. And I remember when I was playing through that segment, I was like, wait, that wasn't the Russians. That was us. So so that was like that really interesting moment, because you have this person who was from a sandy brown hot climate environment, who's explaining what's gone on, and it is an actual kind of historical moment, but it is attributed to Russians because 2019 was Infinity War 2, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Infinity War is like, no, we can't tell people that the Americans did this. Because then they will recognize what an atrocity this was. Then they will recognize that this could literally be considered a war crime. So we're just gonna say the Russians did it.
The Russians did it. The Russians did it. Yep.
Yeah. The Russians did it. It's like when if you have siblings, especially younger siblings or pets when you were a kid, and something got broken, you were like, she did it. It was very much that kind of moment. It was very much that kind of moment. Okay, I'm gonna shut up. Now go finish what you were saying, Victoria.
So that's what happens in the game, is that the game's like, look at the bad that Russia did. And then the game comes out, and players, such as Sam, go, wait a minute. Wait just a minute. That seems remotely American. What about that? So during the Persian Gulf War, so early months of 1991, there is a ceasefire that happens between the United States and its allies and Iraq and Kuwait and all of these Middle Eastern countries. Mm-hmm. Persian Gulf War. And there is a ceasefire, and it's super important that there is a ceasefire. And so what happens? America and its allies decide, what's great? We should attack the retreating Iraqi military forces. They're trying to leave Kuwait on the highway. We should probably not let them do that during the ceasefire. They are retreating, and we're like, yeah, can't have that. It's a ceasefire, but can't have that. So it's bombed. Highway of Death bombed, completely bombed, and like it's massive. And then those who had managed to evade said Highway of Death, like the vehicles that survived it, they were then met by ground troops who then decided, you know what? The Air Force can't have all the fun. We must also engage these retreating people and murder them as well.
Yeah.
And so massive war crime. And there was a cover up, because of course there was, but it's a war crime. And yeah, it's one of those like, that looks distinctly American in this game, where they described exactly what happened, but attribute it to Russia. And Russia's like, we didn't do that. America did that.
And it's interesting, right? Because again, when we start to talk about like the ways that Russia gets depicted, and again, I'm not saying that Russia's in the right. I'm not saying anybody's in the right, but what I'm saying is we got to recognize our own dirt for our own dirt, and not try to change the story, not try to change, I hate to say it because then I sound like a dubro on the internet, not try to change the narrative that's getting constructed, right? Right, it's the narrative. Not trying to change the narrative that's getting constructed, and that the fact that we always, that in these games, right, it is because America's always got to be the good guys. And even when there are bad guys on the American side, they're not a part of the official organization in any way, shape, or form. They turn into Phil Graves, who's not military, but is a mercenary. And he's, again, we talked about this a couple of weeks ago when we on a Wednesday. We were talking about using, you know, when every problem looks like a nail, use a hammer. They all want to be Cop America. Yeah, they all want to be Cap, right? So, but you have that. I forgot what I was saying that fast. I just had this Captain America image pop into my head. But you have these moments that we have to recognize to get a better understanding of where we are and what we should and shouldn't be doing, that we have to be honest about what we've done in the past.
Yeah. And I think Shepard even gets to it. Like when he has his big villain moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
In the game. He's talking to Laswell, and I think it's Laswell he's talking to. But he reminds the person, when we shit, we bury it. To do good, you have to do bad.
I think, was he talking to Price or was he talking to Laswell in that moment?
One of the two. He was talking to one of them because it was like this big moment of, here's my villain story.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to go into my villain monologue. And it could have been ripped exactly from the history books.
Mm-hmm.
It was so very specific into, you know, we can't be seen as, you know, the country that, you know, did the bad thing. Can't have that. When we shit, we bury it. To do good, you have to do bad.
Yes.
And it's the ends justify the means.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it's, I wish the game had explained it more. Why? So you get to that final mission in Chicago, and the missile's gonna hit, right? And suddenly the Marines are there to help you.
Mm-hmm.
The game does not explain why the military is there to help you. But it would definitely make sense because it would look good for Shepard, who is, you know, the general, and he's gonna be caught eventually, right? Yeah, so he's gonna be caught. But he who's been trying to kill these undercover ops of Soap and Ghost and these people that know, he's trying to kill them. But he can't have a missile hit, so he has to get the Marines involved to save face.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this is just so on the nose.
It's Wag the Dog.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's interesting though, because one, I'm still convinced that the Shepard in Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2 is a clone, because I stabbed Shepard in the brain in the first Modern Warfare 2.
Yeah, but Modern Warfare 2 has no, it's rewriting, it's retconning Modern. Everybody's a clone. Soap and Ghost, they should not be, well, Soap should be alive. Soap should not be alive though, because he's supposed to die in Modern Warfare 3. So Soap shouldn't be alive either. But Ghost shouldn't be alive because, you know, he gets shot and it breaks my heart in original Modern Warfare 2.
Mm-hmm.
And at least they've kept Roach dead to this point. But all of them are dead. All of them are clones. This is a multiverse of Call of Duty. It is a COD specialty rewriting the story. So in Black Ops, one of the big first mission in Black Ops is to assassinate Castro, and that's the goal of the Bay of Pigs.
Mm-hmm.
That was never the goal of the Bay of Pigs, ever. It was never the goal. But the game is like, this is the goal of the Bay of Pigs. And when I did the study on it, everyone who played the game and did not watch the documentary answered that the goal, like the purpose of the Bay of Pigs was to assassinate Castro. And all of my people that watched the documentary, I hate them watch the documentary, it was great fun, who watched the documentary were able to answer that the Bay of Pigs was a covert operation. And it, like, the purpose was not to assassinate Castro.
Yeah.
Like, none of them told me, those who had watched the documentary, none of them told me that the purpose was to assassinate Castro, but everyone who played the game was like, the purpose is to assassinate Castro.
And this is why it absolutely terrified me that when I'm giving a talk to educators about, you know, the possibilities of using the problems and possibilities of using AAA titles for educational purposes, somebody was like, yeah, like Call of Duty. And I'm like, no.
Helen, no.
You know, I mean, it's bad enough that, yeah, you're going to, I mean, it's bad enough that you got kids playing Call of Duty that shouldn't be playing Call of Duty. And that's another reason I say kids shouldn't play Call of Duty. One, I think kids shouldn't play Call of Duty under a certain age, right? Because, you know, the games have ratings for a reason.
I was about to say the ESRB would agree.
Yeah, exactly. And the second thing is if you frame it in this historical context, even if it is thinly veiled historical context, folks who don't otherwise know history are going to be like, yeah, that's what happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's such an immersive experience to play a game.
Yes.
And so one of the things is that everyone has a historical memory.
Mm-hmm.
So a memory of where they were at a certain place in time, especially during massive historical events. But then the memory for things that just happen worldwide on a daily basis, because you never know that you're living in history, but history is constantly happening. So it's one of the things that, like, with the pandemic is like, oh, living through history really sucks. Like, living through an actual historical event that you know is a major historical event really sucks. Living through history sucks.
Because this is the beginning of the zombie apocalypse. But yes, go ahead.
Yeah. So, like, I know exactly where I was and what I was doing on 9/11. I know most of the OJ trial because that was always on the TV when I was growing up, when I was a kid. So I know all about that. Like, that's my first very big historical memory is the OJ trial. But I know exactly where I was on 9/11. I don't remember the Cold War, and I shouldn't remember the Cold War because I was 6 months old when it supposedly ended in December of 1991. I have no personal memory of the Cold War, but I have historical memory of the Cold War that you get by being exposed to it, by being exposed to materials, by gathering what you learned from the media and what you learn from sources. All of that contributes to a historical memory. So when AAA titles like Call of Duty are used to teach, they are expanding on a historical memory for players who don't have one of the event. And that's important because most high schools don't teach about the Cold War. It's so late in history that most high school history classes can't get there. Like, it's a late history event. And even the Vietnam War is not taught as a proxy war. Most of the time it's taught as a war. It's the Vietnam War. And even high schools don't like to touch on Vietnam so much because the United States lost.
Yeah.
Like, and Korea as well. Like, it's one of those things that's like, yes, we cannot go into the greatness of America if we use these wars where, one, stalemate, and two, just fleeing in helicopters from Saigon. You know, like, you can't really expand on American exceptionalism and greatness if you are fleeing in helicopters from Saigon. So, but it's one of those things of creating this historical memory in players, and even to a most part of exporting historical memory. Like, we export American exceptionalism and historical memories from an American perspective in video games, in AAA titles like this.
Right, because even aside from exactly, we export it, right? So even aside from our own kind of educational deficiencies in this country, right, building up this historical propaganda machine, right? If you are exporting this to other places, to other peoples, right, they see that as being historical in some way, shape, or form. You're 100% right, and I think it's. That's why, like I said, it was so very disturbing to me in that moment. It was so very disturbing to me in that moment because I think about for a long time, I only played the campaigns, right? But just playing through the campaigns and thinking about what I saw and knowing what the truth was, especially for any of those historical moments that I lived through. And have actual memory of, or even kind of academic memory of, because of history, because history books, again, history is written by the victors, right? But like the ways that we don't think about things like the Korean War, or the ways that we don't think about things like the Vietnam conflict, or don't think about them, don't talk about them, because hashtag we lost, right? And nobody wants to talk about that, because if you talk about the fact that we lost, then we're not the superpower that we want to make ourselves out to be, right? I mean, because I think most people don't think about the hand that we played in a lot of these smaller skirmishes, using scare quotes, skirmishes that we learn about in history, if we learn about it at all, right? Because we don't think about them exactly 100%. We don't think about them as proxy wars. They get billed as these global skirmishes, right? These skirmishes that were going on around the world, and we don't think about the fact that we funded one side of those skirmishes, while often it was Russia that was funding the other side of that skirmish, in an attempt to have these kind of pissing contests, right, in an attempt to have these kinds of mini wars without putting our own citizens at risk, right? Because we were using POC drones at that point, right? We were using, it was okay to use other folks who were going to die, right? It was okay to use other folks that were going to die, as long as we weren't using our own people. And it's the same with the connection, right? The weird stuff. It was the same thing that, we would do often, and had been doing since the Civil War, with people of color in our own military, right? When we start thinking about how black folks got used as cannon fodder during the Civil War, or black folks got used as cannon fodder even during the Revolutionary War, right? So the ways that we've always done this, it's no different than what we've always done in this country. It's just on a grander and more global scale. I know.
What's interesting from a Cold War perspective is Cold War media. So it's understood that Cold War films shift the audience's sympathy to whoever is the representative of justice and authority. That tends to be the United States, or it tends to be like a sheriff, because Westerns starring John Wayne are very good Cold War films. Like, they exemplify the Cold War rhetoric.
And John Wayne was an asshole. Let me just say that out loud. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no argument. But it shifts the sympathy to representatives of justice and authority, or into like representatives of kind of masculine Western masculinity, or representatives of the underdog. And the underdog tends to be the person that's fighting against like a globalist sort of nature. And games are pretty similar. So even while you have in this game, in Modern Warfare 2, you have Hassan, who fighting for his people. He's a counter-revolutionary in Iran. And you have Valeria, who is fighting for her people as a cartel, and focusing on protecting her community in a way that the United States brands bad. Similar for Hassan, like, it's bad. So the sympathy does get shifted to the representative of justice and authority. And even in that moment because when Hassan says, the United States shipped missiles to Iran, and in doing so, it was an act of war. And that moment is interrupted by Phil Graves. And at this point, Phil Graves is not the antagonist that he becomes in, I think, like 3 or 4 missions later. So at this point, you are invited by the game to sympathize with Phil Graves, who just wants to kill this guy, because this guy is threatening the United States, and this guy is like everything that the United States should be against. You are invited to sympathize with him, and to accept Phil Graves as kind of like this beacon of justice and authority. And he's there to, like, why are we setting this guy free? We're just gonna have to go and find him again. He's going to get more missiles. So it's an interesting thing that Call of Duty does, is invites you to, even when the United States is the baddie, it's still like, but Russia. Because this game does that. In the very end, it's like, wait. The big baddie is not Shepard, who we haven't dealt with yet. Like in this game, he doesn't get killed at the end.
No.
Modern Warfare 2, he dies. And in Modern Warfare 2, 2009, he dies. But in this one, he doesn't die.
Mm-hmm.
Phil Graves dies. So you've dealt with the baddie. He's the bad American. You've dealt with him. But the big baddie gets slid to you across the table, and you pick up the picture, and there it is. It's Makarov. It's Russia. Russia is the big bad. Not the United States, not Shepard. You can sympathize with Shepard because Shepard says, we have to bury our shit, and to do good, you have to do bad.
Yeah.
And then, of course, what do we get in the credits? No Russian. No Russian is back.
Yeah. It comes full circle, right? Because Modern Warfare numeral 2, 2009 starts with the no Russian mission, right? At first, I thought they were going to make us play another no Russian mission at the end of Modern Warfare Roman numeral 2. But we start with, again, we got the spoiler tags up. You start with that no Russian mission at the beginning, right, of 2009, where you play as a soldier who's embedded, who goes in and ends up dying as a part of this whole Russian scheme to blame America for these atrocities that America would have committed anyway. But that's a whole nother story. And then at the very end, in like post credits, in this latest Modern Warfare 2, it starts where you're not seeing any faces really, but this is on a plane. This anonymous person gets handed a tray by the flight attendant, and taped under the top there. It's like a James Bond movie. They're able to put together this gun from components that could have made it through TSA check because they weren't metal, right? And they put together this gun on the plane. And then he takes out this Nokia phone, right? It's like this circa 1995 Nokia phone, and it sends this text message, and the text he sends is simply "no Russian." And then he drops it in his drink, and he gets up with the gun and walks out. And you know that all kinds of that carnage is about to ensue, but it comes full circle. It absolutely comes full circle. And in that moment, I sat there and I screamed. And I screamed because I was like, they didn't just do that. They didn't just do that. But it comes full circle in terms of this whole no Russian thing. And I think that is really interesting when we start to think about, and I think I DM'd you this. I was like, I can't believe they released that in this historical moment, in this current political climate, with everything that's going on in Russia right now. I cannot believe that they did it.
I haven't looked, but I wonder if parts are censored for Russia. Because the game, they're playing in Russia as well. The game went to Russia. I wonder if parts of this game are censored in Russia.
That's a good question. I wonder as well, because I say to myself, I can't believe they released this, but it's Infinity Ward, it's Activision, of course they released it.
No, they don't care.
They don't give two shits. Not two. Not one. Not even a half. But I was like, I can't believe they released that, because it really does all come full circle, not only in the game but also where we are. And that comes back to, you and I, Victoria, have this conversation all the time about the fact that the Cold War never ended.
Nope.
Right? It ebbs and flows, but it never ended. And we are clearly, Russia is still always the big bad, right? Russia is still always the big bad. At least we're always positing it as the big bad. Well,
in the current climate, being And I brought this up to you a couple weeks ago because that was when the headline started reading like, "Oh my God, Russia threatened nuclear war," and Biden said that if Russia did that, then we would respond basically like that. Russia knows the policy.
Yep.
We would respond. We would respond. If Russia used nukes, the United States would respond. I'm like, that has been the policy since the 60s.
Yep.
Mutually assured destruction is still the policy. It has never not been the policy since the 60s when it became like, oh man, look at all the, well, we could destroy the world multiple times over. So mutually assured destruction it is. If you launch, we launch. We're all going down. And it's such a big thing is that mutually assured destruction is the policy even now.
Yeah.
And so if Russia launches, that's what's going to happen is it's mutually assured destruction. The Cold War never really ended. It just ebbed and flowed. The USSR was dissolved, but Russia is determined to get its Soviet satellite states back because, shocker, Putin is a dictator with KGB roots. Like Reagan was a Cold Warrior, so is Putin. He's just a Russian Cold Warrior.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Belarus, like Belarus.
Oh,
so
Belarus.
much to say about Belarus.
Belarus, right? Belarus. If you think about
Belarus is like, take us back.
Oh my God, yes.
Simping for Russia. That's what Belarus is doing.
Belarus is like, yeah, we don't like being out here in the. It's like when you first like graduated from college and moved away from home and like had to pay bills or ran into your first kind of economic blow to the gut, like, you know, I don't know, like your car broke down and you were like, oh damn, I can't go to the bar this weekend because I gotta fix my car. Can I come home? Right, that kind of moment. It's kind of that interesting thing because that's where Belarus is right now. It's like, yeah, no, take us back. We will do whatever you want. We will do whatever you want us to do. You know, not thinking about like historically how Russia has treated a lot of the kind of satellites in terms of being like, okay, you go fight and die for us. We ain't backing you up later, but we'll say we will. So, I mean, yeah. I mean, and it's interesting.
Russia's like, that's a nice border you have there, Belarus. Mind if we move some troops to it?
Exactly.
Love us again. Ya Lublu.
It's wild, right? I mean, because like looking at what's going on between like Russia and Ukraine and Belarus and like all of the kind of satellites over there, like in this moment, and looking at it without the context of the Cold War, it really doesn't make much sense. But when you look at it in a larger historical context and look at the fact that this is just a cyclical thing, it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. And to think about, you know, again, what's at stake if this happens again is also another interesting thing. But, you know, a lot of folks don't understand what's going on or what has gone on in the past, so they don't have that understanding.
That's why we need more Cold War history. And not just through Call of Duty.
Exactly.
Like Black Ops is 100% a Cold War game. Modern Warfare 2 is a post 9/11 game that, you know, has roots in the Cold War.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, Black Ops 100% a Cold War game. Even the most recent one was called Call of Duty Black Ops Cold War. I'm like, yes.
Admit it, right? Just let's embrace it, right? Absolutely.
Focusing on that special ops.
Yeah.
I wish it was more critical. So they started to get a little bit critical of these special ops and aspect of doing, like, changing the world, for lack of a better term. But I wish Infinity Ward had gone deeper. They probably would have gotten, like, caught so much flack for it, but they could have gone deeper than just giving Hassan and Valaria a throwaway line. And even Shepard with his throwaway line of, to do some good, you have to do some bad.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And when we shit, we cover it up. Like, these are just throwaway lines that don't really get challenged or explored upon by the other characters in the exposition. If they're already in the exposition, they could be expanded on. And I think that's what disappoints me so often about Call of Duty games, is that they sometimes make the case and then they just leave it and they don't go deeper. They just leave it on a one-off line that you catch and you go, oh yeah, just like when we were playing Far Cry. and there was a throwaway line about United States involvement causing this problem.
Yeah.
And it's just throwaway line, it's gone.
Mm-hmm.
It's like you go deeper. Your throwaway line literally means nothing if you don't back it up and go deeper into what it means.
Mm-hmm. Well, because it challenges it challenges plausible deniability, right? It's like it challenges the fact that the U.S. often uses these other alphabetic organizations to do their dirt just so they can say that wasn't us.
No, it was the CIA. We didn't do that.
Yeah, well, that wasn't us. We didn't do that. I mean, we can't have it. We have to have a Phil Graves to keep our own hands clean. And we've done that forever. We've done that forever. I mean, and we've been talking about it on a more global level, right? We've been talking about it on a more global level, but this is something that has also happened forever within the U.S. itself, right? If we start thinking about the U.S. government's if we start thinking about and talking about the U.S. government's involvement in the civil rights movement, right, and the assassinations of civil rights leaders, y'all, I'm looking out my window for that black van, but I mean, it's the same thing. I would love to see someone like to tackle to tackle a Call of Duty that takes place more on American soil, but is set in the 60s and 70s. That would be fun, because then we could also explore stuff like what was going on with Jimmy Carter and Ronald Reagan and such, but also and JFK, right, and Fidel Castro and all these other folks, but also explore what was going on American soil, which nobody would ever have the nerve to do in the in a AAA game. I don't think they do it. I would love to see it, though. I mean, if people want to talk about how to use games historically, games got to get dirty, and they ain't willing to. Because you have to make it a throwaway line that people might just miss if they too busy going, hurry up and stop talking so I can shoot something, because the dude bros playing the game are not gonna want to hear that.
I saw a TikTok of a guy getting all mad because a flag was burning on the embassy in the level where you're trying to escape this like burning town, like your helicopter has crashed, and from the EMP, that level, there is on one of the embassies a burning American flag. And the guy gets all mad because he's look at how liberal this game is. I'm like, that looks like pathetic. Most of the building is also on fire. It's cloth, it's gonna burn.
It's like, no, the whole building just got bombed, but you know what? That flag will not burn.
That flag. What is it? Those colors don't run, but they sure do burn.
Oh my gosh.
All right, let's play a match.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Tosca, I don't want to keep you, because I know we all busy, and I'm giving a talk at a conference in Germany. I'm not going to be in Germany in the morning, so it's at an ungodly hour for me. But
well, we can cut it. That's great, because my game just kicked me to menu, so
I figured
whole thing was like, nope.
I figured 3 hours is a good chunk of time. It doesn't feel like it's been 3 hours. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Just play until your presentation, girl.
I agree. How much caffeine do you have?
I did drink 32 ounces of iced coffee with an extra shot in it. Oh, this wasn't iced coffee. This was a 4-shot latte. I only had 4 shots, not 5 in my latte. So I'm probably not going to sleep anyway. Well, it really doesn't feel like it's been 3 hours. This was very cool and interesting. Yeah, it has been 3 hours. Can you believe it?
I'm sorry if my theory question was more like, let's complain about the Cold War and all the things and atrocities that happened during it.
No, that was not a complaining. It is just being honest and being critical of um not only Cold War policies, but also like the depiction of the Cold War. Um
We could do better AAA titles, but thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me and being like, hey, you should come talk about the Cold War. I'm like, that sounds great.
we can talk about the Cold
I had a
War
lot of fun.
at anytime you want to. We can talk about the Cold War or anything else. Call of Duty as a franchise is still, I would argue, the biggest game in the industry. We don't have any other military shooters that can hold a candle to Call of Duty. So they could do it, and people would complain and probably send death threats because they're assholes. But they could do it. I would argue they could do it.
If any of the franchises could, it would be them.
Yeah, if any of the franchises could, it would be them. Because Call of Duty is still, Halo, which did it, Call of Duty is still averaging what? Pretty close to $1 billion in their opening week. Except I don't think Vanguard did those numbers because Vanguard was garbage.
Vanguard flopped.
Vanguard was
Vanguard
garbage.
flopped. My favorite part about Vanguard's flop was that they blamed it on Battlefield 2042, which also flopped.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, oh.
Yeah. Oh my God. All right, y'all. Thank you so much. I will let y'all know about stream tomorrow. And Tosca, thank you very much again for playing with me and chatting with us today. I appreciate you for sharing your knowledge, and your shenanigans. Your knowledge and your shenanigans.
Thank you, and thank the chat for putting up with it.
Yes, thank y'all for putting up with the shenanigans.